Okay, we are continuing with our second Florida journey. Steve Keck is going to bring us up to date to where we are. This is February right now, and I didn't record the last one, so we're going to go ahead and have a probably inclusive of 2 months worth right now. So Steve, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back a few months, and this will be some of the people that were at Otter Springs back in January. I gave the presentation there at the campsite. So it might be old information, but I'm just going to go over it a little bit here. And I got a couple maps that two of them was what I had on the easel up at Otter Springs, but we put them on here on the slide. Okay, you want to go on the next one? Okay, this one here, just to get anybody who is looking at the screen there, is this map has been up there before. It's a big overview of the entire peninsula. So we can see there just what was going on back in the fall when Magruder established the Warwick line of where he's going to have his defenses. And just an overview on this to show you where the little flags are out in front. That is where he placed the majority of his regiments. That would be his first line of defense. And they just did patrolling out in there and had pickets. And their job was to keep the Federals from seeing what was being done at the actual Warwick River, which is the blue line with the red dots in it there. That would be basically his big defensive position. His third position, which is mentioned in a couple of books that I researched, is what they call the fallback position. If they need it, would be in the Williamsburg area. And he established this plan in the fall. Now, one of the objectives that he wanted to do was he wanted to get the plantation owners around there to hire out their slaves to do a lot of the manual labor on that. And he got a letter from the War Department that that they would do the negotiating, not him, and that he was not to hire or talk to the plantation owners because the owners were asking too much money through the brokers for what Magruder wanted done, and he was just supposed to be taking care of the planning and getting it done. So that it just brings us up here. The dark line going down through there, just to recap on that, to the north of that is where General Rains had the Northern Division. Below that black line, General McLaws had the Southern Division of Magruder's command of the Army of the Peninsula. And you can see it goes down to the little blue line, that broken line down there by Hampton. That's where the Federals were down in that area there. Basically between the blue line and where the little flags are there is the no man's land that in the fall that both sides were patrolling and would run into each other out in there. So now we're going to move up to the next map. And this is kind of a busy map. It's taken right out of the book of the official atlas of the Civil War. And just to give you a little bit more perspective on this, if you take a look at on this map here, there is a road that comes from Newport News and goes up to Lee's Mill, and another road that goes from the Hampton area up to Yorktown. Those are the two main roads that, and the only two places that crosses the Warwick line. The forces that the units that were stationed south of the Warwick line down in there, just to give you an overview, the civilian population was very sparse down in that area. The civilians didn't have very much to sell to the Confederate forces, and also the Federals were coming up in there with their foraging parties also. Also, Magruder did not allow the settlers and from Upper Williamsburg and Yorktown to come down into that area. So all those regiments that was under his command that were in that area there, they were very limited on what they could do as far as their resources. They had to depend on the Army for their logistics and everything. If they had spending money, there was no settlers to buy it off of, and the civilians didn't want to give up their food either. what limited they had. Magruder also established a pass system so that that was for the soldiers too, to move around in there, and the civilians, so that he could control what was being seen in that defensive line that was being built up on that. Okay. Now the units that were north of the defensive line, the Warwick River, they had more access to sutlers, and they could move around a little bit more, go into town, except the town of Yorktown only had a population of 200 right before the war. It grew exponentially as sutlers and vendors and all kinds of people from Richmond came down there that wanted to profit off of the army. And this gets into where, you know, you talk into different areas about this is anything from women of ill repute, we could say, to shady sutlers and high prices that they tried to control. Okay, now I'm going to go through on we'll take a look at the next slide. It's more detail. See, we're focusing from the whole peninsula. Now we're down to where the York or the Warwick defensive line is the red line in along there. And I'm going to point out Lee's Mill is right there. On up the Warwick River, you can see where it says Wynn's Mill. Another location we're going to talk about is when we mentioned earlier about that the second Florida first went to Young's Mill, which is over by the James River, south on this map a little bit. But on then in October, they moved across the peninsula over to Ships Point. Now, according to what I could find out in the official records, I didn't find any emplacements, rifle pits or anything like that, but there's a battery located right there. So we know that the War Department put out a letter to the peninsula's engineers that stated that since they didn't have a contract for slaves to do any digging of the fortifications, that the Peninsula, Army of the Peninsula's engineers would have to depend on hiring any civilians in that location that wanted to get a wage, or they could hire free Negroes who lived on the peninsula. These are not slaves. These were people who had their freedom, and they could be paid a wage to work there too. The only third course of action that Magruder had was to use his soldiers to do the actually digging. This goes into December when they had to do this, that up in the fall and into December. So now we got the second floor is over at Ships Point, and from what I could gather in the readings and that, they were doing a lot of digging. This is December. It's cold. It's miserable. Frozen at night, muddy, thawing during the day, and they stayed there on Ships Point until December 17th, when they were ordered to leave what is called the Camp Grafton area on Ships Point, and they moved up to Wynn's Mill. Now, it refers to Camp Grafton, and I never found out exactly where Camp Grafton was, but we know it's somewhere between Cockletown and Ships Point. But Cockletown on the modern maps is now called Grafton, Virginia. Okay, the second Florida stayed at Wynn's Mill till the 19th. They're only there a couple of days. The next day, we're told to take all of their able-bodied soldiers that were not sick, and they moved up to the north side of Wormsley Creek, which is up in, there's a little town called, or a little house up there called the Moore House. And that little area right in there is, it's also known, the Moore House is where I believe Cornwallis negotiated for the surrender of the British forces in the Revolutionary War. Okay, they stayed there for, till approximately December 26th. Then they moved back down to Wynn's Mill again. And at that time, they went into winter quarters. also in the official records is also is a memorandum put out by Magruder that beginning right around the 1st of January, he pulls everybody back to the Warwick line, except for less than 1,000 soldiers that'll be staying out in the south of the line in the country. He keeps a battery and a small unit down at Big Bethel. And that's one of the major road intersections that's got to come up to Yorktown, on the Yorktown Hamilton Road, it's called. But basically, he's telling all of his forces that he has the 1st of January that they are to go into winter quarters now. And what's going to happen is there's really not any activity going to take place between the Warwick River defenses and the federal forces. They go into winter quarters. They're not moving around out there in the country. And you can kind of look at it as going to be kind of a boring area for them. But also around the 1st of January, the War Department finally gave the okay, and they got the set price on the hiring of the slaves from the plantation owners. And Magruder on his first increment was authorized to have 500 slaves hired. And I thought it was interesting at the same time, I think it was in the same memorandum from the War Department, Magruder, that was put out that if he didn't have enough manual labor to do that, all of the county sheriffs on the peninsula were authorized to basically call it draft half of the freed Negroes and impress them into work. They and any civilian workers and the slaves would be paid $10 a month. And it was up to the engineer department of the Army of the Peninsula to house, feed, and pay for this labor. Okay, that's basically, we're getting into now that January and February is just it's inactive. The boys in the 2nd Florida, they're in the windmills area. And from what I gather from reading some of the reports and everything, they are between Wynn's Mill and the Yorktown Road. I haven't taken the time to pin down the exact location, but since we're on the north side there, they do have access that they could theoretically, if they've got some money and since they're not moving anymore, I'm sure mail is getting to them. Mail seemed to be something that was pretty good back at that time. So they were getting commodities from home, long underwear, socks, shirts, money, writing paper. If you look at different readings about what went on with different units, not exactly 2nd Florida, but there was dances, potentially that maybe a company commander would get with somebody back that would, a farmer that would provide the barn and a little punch. And, you know, if a company, it'd be hard for a whole regiment, like maybe, I don't know, 600 men, 800 men at that time, to actually go to a barn dance, probably by company or something like this. If the soldiers behave themselves, didn't have any infractions, and could get a pass from the company commander. Now, to give you an idea of what was going on, this is just about the weather. One thing that could be a little bit, I got this from it's the Richmond Dispatch and other newspapers that are, it is Richmond, but it's reported from various sources like Yorktown, Williamsburg, and also Norfolk, which is a little bit farther south and east. And just to give you a quick, on a few days there, like, before I go on, I want to tell you too, that as of the 1st of January, Magruder had approximately a little over 13,000 soldiers of all 3 branches of the service, infantry, artillery, and cavalry, on the peninsula that was under his command as of January 1st, 1862. The weather is probably, I compared it with what they had in the newspapers back then with what it is now. It's not that much different. The January 15th, they had what they just referred to as many inches of snow. The children in Richmond and Williamsburg were actually able to get out with their sleds and go sledding down the hills. The trains on the Richmond and York River had delays that day because of too much snow accumulation. But the weather would also moderate and clear up and get sunny, but be very cold and brisk. And they had it, so it's all over the charts as far as one day it would be snowing real hard, the next day it would be rain and sleet. It would thaw out during the day, freeze at night. This is very typical, especially for anybody who's lived in the north, that it's just going to be harsh weather for the most part. So they probably sitting in their encampments in there. And one thing that when in some of my reads, that trying to figure out what did they kind of quarters they lived in. And what I'm finding is that the Florida boys seem to, in any of the locations, which this is more unique to the 2nd Florida than any of the other regiments down there, because every place that they got moved around that I described across the peninsula, they started building winter quarters there also. And if I was them, I guess I would really, the typical soldier that grumbles all the time, because they would move into a place, they'd start building their winter quarters, the weather's harsh, and about the time they got them done, they had to move again. So we can count at least 3 different sets of winter quarters that they built. And they all seem, from what I'm reading, is the 2nd Florida like to do the log cabin type with the canvas roof over it and the crude mud and stick chimneys. So that is really the next, go the other way. Okay, there's one more that I got, it's on the end, we're going the wrong way. Okay, I put this one up here just so kind of visualize that's a cold winter day. You can see there's about all different kinds of huts you see there, from canvas tents to wall tents, 2-man tents, to they're not really log cabins, but made out of wood with the stick and mud chimney and that. But being outside when the wind's blowing, the wind chill's probably 30 degrees outside. You got to pull picket duty or guard duty of some kind. I don't really know if I'd stand around like that. Most soldiers want to stay under cover. So, but that is basically in a nutshell of what's going on. Now, Clay, I got one other little place here. It's just a point of interest, but it doesn't really relevant to, I just came across an article about one of the units that I believe that they occupied the 2nd Florida's quarters at Young's Mill after the 1st of January. It's a Virginia unit that moved in there after the 2nd Florida moved out. And the reporter spent a holiday around the Christmas time with the unit, and he describes a little bit about what was going on with his quarters, but I'm probably going to have to save that for another time. Now, that's all I have for today. And it's going to get, for about the next month, it's just going to be this kind of inactivity, if you want to call it that. And if I could, I'll give another presentation at Narcoossee, because that's going to be the last weekend in March.
Right.
And the week before that, or almost 2 weeks before that, things are really going to start happening on the peninsula. There's a big event that's going to take place. I think it's either March 17th or March 19th that is going to make the peninsula come to life.
Well, are you talking about the Merrimack?
No, the Merrimack took place, I believe, on March the 9th.
Oh, the not a little earlier. Okay.
Yeah, that's earlier. But for those of you who like your history, if you want to go ahead and look ahead in some of the history books, you can see what took place around March the 17th to March the 20th.
You know,
And
the fun about doing this, Steve, and the fun thing about following 160th is think about how long ago we had the camp of instruction. It was last April, I think, and last year, and all this time, you know, we've had this army. It's a lot of people have gotten sick, but all this time has gone by, and no one's fired a shot yet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It gives you a good perspective of the life of the soldier back then.
well, a little, yeah, and a little sidebar on that there. See, the Confederate Congress at this time is in discussion about what to do because they realize that within the next couple of months, all these soldiers that have not fired a shot, they're coming up on their 1 year anniversary.
Yeah.
And if they don't do something, and I think you know what it is they're going to do, that they have to pass some kind of legislation to keep those soldiers in the army, or there's going to be a mass exodus, not only of the Army of the Peninsula, but also the army of what is referred to as Army of the Potomac / Army of Northern Virginia at this time.
Yeah.
And they're going to have a manpower problem. And they'll have no way of defending Richmond or any other place.